I found some good references or information that us as we really good discussion last week, Jesus actually answers All right, there we go. That's better. I'm not aggressive and I do not have a loud voice. Thank you, Dad. So there's a question asked in 19, and it seems as though Jesus answers that question without saying, here's the answer. He just launches into this parable. And within this parable is the answer to the question. In fact, we find not so much a response to that, but we find basic human thinking when we get down to verse 20, if we make it that far today. So one of the questions that was asked, and maybe you remember this, in verse 25. What question is asked there after Jesus talks to them about it is easier for a camel to go through the eye of a needle than for someone who's rich to enter the kingdom of God. And then what is the question? Who then can be saved? So if that's what it takes, who can be saved? Jesus ends all of this, or I should say Matthew ends this narrative with many who are first will be last, and many who are last will be first. And it's almost as if when we then enter chapter 20, and I want to remind you guys, as I remind myself often, that again, none of these gospels are chronological narratives. In other words, one story, an event doesn't follow another that we understand. They are all in terms of content narrative. They're pockets of ideas that are given to us. So, in other words, the events of 20 don't follow the events of 19 in terms of events, but in terms of thought. So when you come out of chapter 19, it seems as though Jesus is going to then answer that question, who can be saved, in terms of if I do more, if I'm closer to the Lord, if I'm in his inner circle, if I have been with him the entire ministry that he's been on earth, if I was there whenever he was passing out food, and I was like in the thick of it, and I was passing out food and picking it up, surely I'm not going to be more important, but I'm going to get more because I've done more. And even outside of a Judaistic thought, isn't that kind of a human thing? You know, if I do more, if I work for more, if my paper's longer, if I'm there 12 hours as opposed to 2, whatever the case may be, I think it's a very human thought that we have. And yet Jesus ends this. If you find yourself being first in terms of your mindset, you're going to be what? You're going to be last. But if you are last in terms of being humble, in terms of recognizing your position, not your position, but how God views things, you're going to be first. So going into chapter 20, Jesus then launches off again with this simile, this metaphor. And he does this a lot in his teachings. The kingdom of heaven is like. So he gives them this imagery that they're very familiar with. A landowner that goes out to hire workers for his vineyard. And the very first group, he's going to pay them a denarius. And the little bit I read up on this, that was normal. That's what they got paid. And so like some of your smaller towns, I don't know, this may happen in bigger towns, you would have your guys that would go out, they would have all their stuff ready, and the owner would come through and pick guys for work. And they'd get out there 5, 6 in the morning, and they would be picked for the work. Well, the landowner in this parable, as he goes out to find workers, does it 5 times during the day. He does it at 9 in the morning. I'm sorry, he first goes out in the morning. And he goes out at 9, he goes out at noon, at 3, and then at 5. 5 times during the day he goes out to find these people. And at the end, when he goes out in verse I didn't bring my glasses. What verse is that? 6. 5 in the afternoon, he goes out and there's still people standing around. So he asks them, why haven't you been working? Why are you still standing here? Because no one has hired us. So you also go work in my vineyard. So something I have not noticed before, for whatever reason, when evening came, the owner of the vineyard said to his foreman, so who actually makes the payment to the people? It's the foreman. Is it the vineyard owner? It's the foreman that does this. Now, I don't know if that has any relevance anywhere. I've just, for whatever reason, never noticed that. So he says, call all the workers together and pay them their wages. And where does he start? Notice this. Where does he start? Those that were hired last. So if you flip this, and the people that were hired first, they get their money, and then you go down, by the time you get to the last ones, is there an issue for the first people? Because they're probably already gone. And they don't care. They just know they got a denarius, and it may have trickled down in the community later. But initially, they may not care. But he begins with the people who worked last. Those who came in and only worked an hour. And they didn't work in the heat of the day, as one of the complaints is going to be by the ones that worked first and second shift, if you will. So when those who, verse 10, came and were hired first. Now, in chapter 19, and oftentimes with the apostles and the early disciples, especially with the apostles, what generally was their attitude sometimes that we find within some of these stories about where they belong, who they are to Jesus? Because they came in first. And so as we're going to look later on with James and John's mother, you have this mindset. We've been there since the beginning. We've traveled with you. We've worked with you. Who was there whenever all that food needed to be handed out? Who was there whenever the Sermon on the Mount, which that's not what they called it, but you know that big teaching we did? Who was there to convey all your thoughts? When that terrible guy with all the demons came, who was there for, you see what I'm saying? We've been here this whole time. We have worked all day. We've been in the heat of the day. We've done all this. And yet you're telling us that there are people that come in later that could have the very same reward, that could be in the same situation as us. Notice also in verse 3 and 4, what did he tell the people, regardless of the time of day it was, what they were going to get paid? What is right? I'll pay you what's right. Not even necessarily what you deserve, but I'm going to pay you what's right. So whether you worked since 9 in the morning or whether you worked the last hour of the workday, I'll pay you what's right. I find that interesting. And so he goes out at different times of the day. Do you guys have any thoughts on, because I'm still mulling this over. Remember again, and I don't know if this gets old or not, but I have to remind myself sometimes that a lot of these stories we get, the prodigal son didn't happen. The Good Samaritan didn't happen. These are parables, they're stories that Jesus is offering as a visual to teach a lesson, to teach an idea of how God sees things. So this doesn't happen. I mean, it could, but what I'm getting at is Jesus is laying out this story. It's not a general story, but it's a story to possibly answer that question in chapter 19. So all of these pieces that are here are to meet an end, to go toward an idea. And so he starts at the beginning of the day. They work the whole day in the heat of the day. They do most of the work. And when he comes up against the people at 5 in the afternoon, why aren't you working? No one's hired us. Well, go to work. They work for an hour. Maybe they pick up stuff. They don't do much. And yet they get the same amount as the people that have been there all day. And again, verse 8, when evening came, the owner of the vineyard said to his foreman, call the workers and pay them their wages, beginning with the last, and then you go to the first. The workers who were hired in the 5 in the afternoon came, and could you imagine standing around there, and as you're talking to your buddies, because he starts at the end, and somebody says, Did you hear that? Did I hear what? Did you hear what that guy got paid? No, what did he get paid? A denarii. Wait, what? But that's what we're going to get paid. And we've been here since the beginning. And we've done all the work. I mean, I'm sweating my face off over here. And that guy, he literally got here an hour ago. And so for us, we're not inserted into this story. We're just reading it. But imagine for these people. And so somebody who caught on to Jesus later on in his ministry, maybe that was healed of something. And maybe a month before the crucifixion, maybe 2 months before the crucifixion, and as he's following Jesus, he gets the same amount of attention, the same amount of time. In fact, he gets healed, but he was there a month before. He gets the same attention, the same power, the same everything from Jesus as the guys that have been there since the beginning. And so whenever they received it, verse 11, they began to do what?
Complain.
They complained, they grumbled, they fussed. Against who? The landowner. I say this a second time. Remember, this is a parable, so those people who are wanting high positions or wanting more of something, who are they fussing against? God, the Father, Yahweh, whatever it may be. So they begin to fuss. They begin to grumble against the landowner. Those who were hired last worked only 1 hour. And notice what it says, I guess, depending upon the translation you have. What does it say after that? Verse 12. Made them equal to us. Yeah.
When I read this, I think, again, you just mentioned it, it's a parable.
Yeah.
But it's a parable about the kingdom.
Yeah.
So when Jesus is telling them this, he's saying it's not about the work that you do. You can't work for it.
Right.
It's about what the master gives.
Right.
And So
Yeah.
he's giving freely to everyone, whether it's the last hour, and so you think about like people who make those deathbed confessions.
Right. Yeah.
Are they going to be in heaven?
Yeah.
I would say yes, probably.
Yeah.
I'm not.
Yeah.
I hope they are, because I want everybody to
Yeah.
go to heaven, but
Yeah.
it's about what Jesus has done.
But see, I think even to ride that truck a little longer is, and I don't know how you guys have processed this over the years, but you have somebody that, whatever you want to call it, from just a visual level, that grew up in a Christian home and was a Christian for 75 years of their life and did X, Y, and Z. And then all of a sudden you have a person that has lived the total opposite life. I mean, a complete contrast. And they're 76 years old, and somebody comes and shares Jesus with them, and that happens. And whether they live another year or another 6 months or whatever, and now they are a Christian, and a month later they're dead. And I don't know, I've never been in part of any conversations where that's been an issue. But it may be for some. Ty, do you have a thought?
With the way the world is now, I sometimes look at this from a financial perspective instead.
Okay.
You're jealous.
Yeah.
It's the guy's money. He can do what he wants with it. It's none of your business. If
Right.
he is more generous to the guy that came last versus the first.
Right. Yeah. And hold on, Les. And to Jonathan's point, it's if you follow Jesus and you walk in his light, what do you get? Same thing. Regardless of since you've been doing it since you were 2. Now follow me here. When I say 2, I mean in terms of, walking in Jesus, or you started at 78. You walk in the light, you have fellowship, et cetera. And so a lot of this, it seems, tied to your point, is look, it's just not fair. Well, what did I say I'd give you? A denarius. What did I say I'd give this guy? A denarius. So what's the problem? Because it's not what? Fair. It's not fair. People doing it longer should get more. Such a very human thing. Yeah, Les.
In fact, that you get the joy of being a Christian your whole life.
Yes. Yeah. But see, the great point, because that's more our joy and our perspective and how we view it, as opposed to getting mad at God that we should somehow get a better reward, which is what this is ultimately about. Yeah, Harold.
I once went to a lecture from a man that worked with learning disabled kids, and he said, fair is not giving everything to everyone equal.
Yeah.
Fair is giving what they need.
Yeah.
And that's what Jesus is doing for us.
Yeah.
Giving us what we need to be saved.
Yeah. Very true. Good point. Yeah.
I also see this as just being an example of God saying what he'll do and doing it, basically
Okay.
keeping his word.
Okay. Yeah. Good point also. And by the way, the times I tell somebody they make a good point, and the other ones, like I just did, I just kind of sit there. In my head, it's a good point, and I'm processing, because I really like that one. And I'm like, so again, verse 11, you've made them equal to us who have borne the burden of the work and the heat of the day. But then he answered them, I'm not being unfair to you, and at least in the translation, what does he call this person that is arguing with him? A friend. He doesn't puff his chest out. He doesn't get away from me. You're no good to me. Don't. I'm not being unfair to you, friend. Didn't you agree to work for denarius? So then what does he say? Take your pay. Go home. Go do whatever you need to do with it. Don't worry about the guy that came in at 5. You take care of you. I want to give the one who was hired last the same as you, as I gave you. Don't I have the right to do what I want with my own money? Or are you envious because I am generous? You know, I went to the wrong place. That's been bothering me since I've been sitting here. There it is, verse 27. Not the who can be saved, but verse 27. What's 19:27 say?
What then will there be for us?
Yeah. Well, what's the question before that?
Who they present.
What's that? No, verse 27.
They've stated that we have left everything to follow you.
We've left everything. And you can almost read between the lines, man, we've been here since the beginning. And you said, come follow me, and we did it. We have left family. And in fact, if you ever watch The Chosen, one of the earlier episodes is, Peter is away from his wife for quite some time. We've left everything to follow you. What will there be for us? So if it's that hard to get into the kingdom, which is what they got from this thing that did happen, the rich, the guy wondering about eternal life, if it's hard for him and it's this difficult to get in, okay, so walk with me here. If it's that hard to get in, and we've been with you for, let's say, 2.5 years, what is the honest question then? What do we get? What do we get for our sacrifice, our struggle, the discipline we've had? What are you going to give us as your disciples? Now remember, again, Jesus is not Jesus yet. He's not Messiah. And even if he is Messiah to them, what kind of Messiah is he? He's going to bring back David's kingdom. He's going to get rid of Rome, and he's going to usher in this new kingdom. So what are you going to give us? Is that a fair, valid question? Now, before you answer it in a churchy way, is that a fair, valid thing for them to ask as humans? What are you going to give us? We've been here for all this time. Yeah. And I think all of us might ask the same thing. What are you going to give us? Yeah.
He says that, when he was talking to the rich guy, basically that, you have to get, if you give up
Yes.
You'll get more. So like, okay, we'll get
Yeah. Seriously. No, that's a great point, because when the guy asked him, how do I get eternal life? What was the answer? The last 5, 6 commandments, right? And the disciples are like, man, we've worked on that. We're good there too. Which ones? And he tells them those. All these I have kept. What do I need to do? Now, this is another thing that I think we skip over. I was reading something the other day that sometimes one of our frailties, faults, I don't know what you call it, maybe a blind spot, is we know these stories so well. And we've been listening to them for so long, there may be some parts of it that we just miss, because we know what's coming. We know them very well. As they're listening to this guy in this whole conversation, he tells Jesus, all this I have kept. What do I lack? What do I need to do? So what does Jesus tell this guy? And again, you know the answer. What does he tell him? Get rid of everything. And not only get rid of everything, but give it to the poor. Don't give it to your friend who's also wealthy. Don't give it to the synagogue, maybe. Give it to the poor. Yeah.
Part of their culture was a rich person was good in the sight of God. They were doing what was right.
Yeah, that's a good point. Yeah.
Anybody that was poor, they would probably work. And so that was part of their thought process.
Yeah. No, boy.
Right side, upside down, whatever.
That's really interesting, because when you look at the story of Job, was Job a wealthy man? Very. Did Job have a family? Yes. Was Job well-to-do in terms, was he seemingly a good businessman? And in fact, if you look at Job and you look at how that's laid out, you're not going to find a better guy than Job in terms of as a husband, as a father, as a businessman, all of it. He's great. So whenever all this stuff happens to him, what then do his friends assume? Man, you did something, because before you were really good with God and God was killing it for you. But now you're not. So with this guy, get rid of all your possessions. And then when you get rid of them, you will be good again. How do I get, now remember, if you put these two together, this whole thing starts with, how do I get eternal life? And for this guy, take all your holdings, give them to the poor, and then follow me. So follow me as a poor guy. Follow me as a guy that doesn't have anything.
I think Jesus is trying to tell him too that it's not a check mark. It's not all these boxes to be ticked, the rules to be followed. It's a heart.
Right.
And,
Right.
you're doing that, and I know Jesus really appreciated that he was doing it. But it wasn't really deep in his heart, or he would have been given it.
Yeah, exactly. Now, I don't know how you guys process, and again, we talked about this last week. Jesus seems to get a little cryptic, and what I mean by cryptic is, it's almost like he says, I've been very plain up to this point, and now I'm going to kind of shroud it in a little complicated verbiage, at least for us. At the renewal of all things, which I personally think is the post-resurrection, at the renewal of all things, when the Son of Man sits on his glorious throne, you who have followed me will also do what? Sit on 12 thrones, judging the 12 tribes of Israel. And I think there's a lot of language there that we don't understand that's very much something that they got. Anyone who has left houses, brothers, all of this list of things will inherit eternal life. But many who are last will be first, and the first will be last. So then Matthew pops into chapter 20 and gives us this thing where it doesn't matter when you come in, it doesn't matter how you come in, are you going to follow? Are you going to abide by these precepts that Jesus gives us? And he repeats it in verse 19. Well, the last thing he says in terms of this parable, don't I have a right to do what I want with my own money? Or are you envious that I am so generous? And I am generous to people who haven't done a lot. I'm generous with people that came in at the very end. And in fact, the end people are going to get the very same that the beginning people get. So if we have time, we're going to dip a little bit into verse 20. And so then Mary, the mother of Zebedee's sons, which it's interesting that Matthew refers to her as Zebedee's sons as opposed to what her name is. And for those of you that your mind is reeling about the whole patriarchy thing, that may be true. But in other cases, it just straight out says the woman's name. So I'm not sure what's happening here. The mother of Zebedee's sons came to Jesus with her sons and kneeling down asked a favor of him. What is it that you want? Grant that one of these two sons of mine may sit at your right and the other at your left in your kingdom. You don't know what you're asking. Can you drink the cup that I'm going to drink? Which they still haven't probably processed the times that Jesus has said this, at least 5 times. The Son of Man will be turned over, he will be beaten, and then he will be killed, and then on the third day he will raise. Do you want to drink the same cup that I'm going to drink? The sons answered, we can. You indeed will drink my cup, but to sit on my right and my left is not for me to grant. And then when the 10 heard this, verse 24, they were indignant. And I haven't compared the words yet. I'm just now noticing this, that the indignant here versus the envious of verse 15. But it's interesting that those that had worked most of the day were envious of his generosity toward those that worked toward the end. And then when the 11 or the 10 found out what not only James and John but their mother had done, they were now indignant. They were upset with these two guys. And Jesus called them together and said, I would assume called the apostles together, the rulers of the Gentiles lord it over them, and their high officials exercise authority over them. Then what's he say? Verse 26. That's not how this is going to go. That's not how the kingdom of heaven. And remember, again, the beginning of chapter 20, verse 1, what is the kingdom of heaven like? We got this landowner, and he's going to go out and find his workers, and ultimately he's going to pay the same amount to the beginning that he does to the end. Everybody gets paid the same, regardless of how long they've been in, regardless of how much work they've done. Yeah.
You notice that also the order in which they were paid.
Yeah.
Paid the long ones 1 denarius first, they would have left and never known what anyone else got paid.
Right.
But he intentionally makes the point by paying the shortest workers first.
Right. And with that, I want you guys to notice again and remember, who pays the people? The foreman, not the landowner. Now, I don't know what to connect that to, but I find that interesting that Jesus purposefully tells, and maybe it's as simple as in this culture with this setting, that's just who does it. It's like, Andy, don't overthink this. The foreman, that's me. The foreman pays him, that's just how it is, so move on. So I will. I'll just move on. Don't overthink that one, Andy. So when you get to the request of James and John's mother, they get indignant. And I don't think they get indignant because of the question in terms of it doesn't matter. But they're indignant. It's like, man, you beat me to it. Maybe. The rulers of the Gentiles lord it over them, and their high officials exercise authority over them. But that's not how this is going to go. Not so with you. Whoever wants to be great among you must be your servant. And there's a lot of interesting discussion in scholarly circles about servant as opposed to slave. At least in our culture, those words can be very different. Whoever wants to be first must be your slave, just as the Son of Man did not come to be served, but to serve and give his life as a ransom for many. You know, when you get to John chapter 13, and it can become kind of a cliche, the whole washing of the feet. But what is the rabbi, the teacher, and what's going to become the Messiah after the resurrection, what does he do for these people? He becomes the least. He becomes the humble servant. He washes feet. And this has been said often, especially in this culture. When was the last time you washed somebody else's feet? Maybe that's not your spouse. I mean, I don't like to touch feet. I struggle touching Terry's feet. Their feet. I don't like to touch my own feet, actually. Maybe that's more of a personal issue than anything else. I just don't like it. But here we find Jesus doing that. He becomes a servant. He becomes a slave. So he does the very thing that he talks about here. Not so in this kingdom. In this kingdom, the servants, the slaves, are what? They're the first. They are the people of the highest notch, if you will, because they are most like Jesus.
Not just
Right, right. Yeah, exactly. Exactly.
But not the highest notch.
What's that?
Not the highest notch. All the people got paid the same.
Yeah. Well,
One got paid first, but they all got paid the same.
I only meant that when he says, the first will be last and the last will be first, in terms of because they do all get paid the same. Everybody's on this even ground. Anything else? All righty. Thank you for your comments. Yeah, have a great week.